Hello, my name is Laura Saunders, Marketing and PR Manager, and welcome to Robinson Hall Experts Talk. Today is the 12th of March, and we are going to be discussing turning your empty barn into commercial use. I have David Watling and David Sawford with me. David Watling is Head of Commercial Property. David's been involved in all aspects of commercial property for over 30 years. He specialises in conducting valuations together with providing advice on development, lease renewals, rent reviews and dilapidations. Welcome, David.
Good morning, Laura.
David Sawford is Partner and Head of Planning and Building and Project Consultancy. David has extensive knowledge of construction methods and building use types, both in design and project management of building works. David is extensively involved with planning advice focused on commercial refurbishments and extensions. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Laura.
So first things first, I'm a farmer. I've got an empty barn, which I have decided I would like to convert into commercial use. Where do I start?
I would suggest, Laura, they pick up the phone, ask us to come and see them as a first instance. I think we've got to see the building primarily to be able to give them accurate guidance. Obviously, farms have lots of different types of buildings, whether it's, say, a former grain store or a current grain store with good height, for example, that would lend itself to perhaps a storage use, or perhaps a more traditional barn, which maybe built of stone, that would perhaps lend itself to an office or even a retail use at the moment. Get on the phone, we'll come and see you. There's no charge for us to come and see you, to give you some informal advice, and then we can talk you through what those certain uses might be.
I would just add, in addition to the type of building, it's also where the site is located, transport links, highway safety, passing trade. They all factor into what would be viable, and actually what will be acceptable to the local authority. I'm thinking more sort of flood risk, highway safety type factors.
And I think, David, it's important also where it sits on the farm, because it needs to be you need to try and separate the farm business operation from your potential commercial operation.
Absolutely, you don't want visitors wandering through, and security is quite often a factor on farms. You don't want random people wandering through your yard, wandering into your buildings and seeing what's about. So actually segregating it is absolutely essential from a health and safety and security perspective.
If you've got an office use, for example, you don't want culture machinery hammering past your front door every 5 minutes, or perhaps a cow going out for milking twice a day.
So I guess as a farmer, you might think, "Oh, I'll do it this way," but actually, we've seen it all. As both Davids have said, pick up the phone, give us a call, and we can kind of visit your site and see what would work best based on our experience. So, what planning options are available to farmers that want to convert their barns to commercial use?
So there are multiple planning options, and we're assuming that everything is in agricultural use. If it's not, if it's already partially commercial, then the options are different.
Okay.
So you obviously have the option of full planning consent. That is applicable. Anybody can apply for full planning consent, and that would be the route you'd have to go and be forced to go if you already have a commercial occupier without formal consent. If you've got an agricultural building that has, or the last use was agricultural, you have the option of a prior approval application under Class R, and that allows a change of use of the building but doesn't allow any works to the building. So when you're doing a Class R, that is just to get the principle of the commercial use, and it has to be followed up with a full planning consent if any physical works are required to the building.
Right. And roughly, like, what timescales are we looking at?
It depends on the job. In terms of our timescales, in order to get validation, we have to prepare plans for the building, floor plans, and a site and location plan in order to submit a Class R application.
Yeah.
Once the application goes in, then we're talking about should be 8 to 10 weeks to get a determination. Some of the local authorities are inundated and have delays, and ultimately I I wouldn't rely on it being 8 weeks.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is it's more like 10 to 12 weeks, in fairness.
Okay.
And it's very similar timescale for a full planning application.
Yeah.
The benefit of going for the Class R, which is the selling point of Class R, is that it circumnavigates the local plan policies. So the grounds for refusal on a Class R are much more limited than on a full planning application. So those grounds being predominantly highway safety, sustainability, flood risk, and there are a few others, but much more limited. Whereas going down the full planning application route, you have to look at the local plan policies and zoning, because there's generally policies for requiring commercial operators to be in particular zones,
Yeah.
and to resist development in the open countryside particularly. So to get over those policies can be quite challenging in some circumstances.
In terms of the Class R and full planning permission consents, if I can call it that, how long are they valid for?
You need to trigger the consent within 3 years.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much applicable on both full planning and the Class R. Obviously, with the Class R, that means you have to have the occupier on site within that 3 year period.
Right.
And if you have to do physical works to the building before that, then you need to follow up pretty quickly
Yeah.
for full planning consent in order to do the works to get the tenant in place
To meet that
to
deadline.
meet that deadline. Whereas with a full planning consent, you don't have to have the occupier on site within that 3 years, although, if you've got the consent,
You'd want to.
You'd want to.
Yeah,
to
you would.
start generating the income. But it is possible to get the consent, implement the works by doing some substantial work that required the consent in order to secure it.
Yeah.
If
The financials don't stack up straight away, it secures it for the long run.
Okay.
So if you had a range of buildings, perhaps that would form part of the overall application, you can trigger the permission by carrying out certain of the works, but not all of the works.
Under full planning consent, correct.
Yeah.
You could trigger it by converting the first barn, getting a tenant in there, and it's secured the consent for the whole range.
And that income could help you generate.
Yeah, and we often see that that you get consent for a range of buildings. A landlord may well convert one or two, get them let, toe in the water, check that it's viable, get some income, and then use that income to do the next.
So you know,
Couple
that the permission is live.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we've kind of jumped from meeting us to planning. Talk me through the process.
Yeah, so as we said at the beginning, pick up the phone. I will, or my colleagues will come and see you. And I think initially I would be looking at the buildings that you have on offer potentially to give you guidance as to what they might be able to be used for, allied to what income they might generate.
Yeah.
Obviously, running alongside that and of great importance is what might it cost to convert those buildings. Obviously, if you're going to be looking at converting to an office type use, the cost of conversion will be potentially considerably more than perhaps converting a grain store to storage use.
Yeah.
There's very little you might have to do to the grain store. You've got potentially light and power in there and a loading door in there.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's storage, that's all they need. Whereas if it's office, obviously you've got people sitting there, the environment's totally different, and the costs obviously are considerably more.
Absolutely, and that's where I will feed in cost information, but also provide a fee quote for doing the measured survey, preparing the drawings, preparing the planning application, and ultimately, if required, to prepare budget costs and assist with the conversion works if that's needed, depending on the scale of the proposal, whether it's, if it's transforming a portal frame general purpose building to a storage building, there's very little conversion works. As David said, if it's an office, if you've got a stone wall converting it to an office, there's substantial works. And ultimately, you need to be satisfied that the return is viable and worthy of that investment.
And then once the work's done, obviously we can market the property and potentially find tenants for you.
Yeah, in principle, we can. But once we've got a timeline in effect, we can start marketing perhaps whilst the works are even being carried out for, let's say, an office type user, because some users might want a sort of semi-bespoke fit out, which if we got the right tenants and we can get the right rent, we might be inclined, or the client might be inclined to do, just to secure that letting.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Great. So we touched a little bit on obviously discussing rents when you meet the client, and it very much depends on what they envisage. But just so we kind of know as a bit of a rough scale, what rents are we seeing, both for like storage as well as office retail?
Yeah, it depends on location. It depends on the type of building and size, I would suggest. For a storage building of less than 500 square metres, for example, I would expect you to be able to achieve a rent of £4 to £6 a square foot. Generally, this is a bit broad brush, acceptably, but if it's bigger than that, sort of 500 square metres plus, we're probably coming down a little bit towards £4 a square foot. If it's an office of, let's say, 50 square metres, or so, I would expect you, depending on the specification, to get £12 to £14 a square foot.
Okay.
Per annum.
So it is a very broad
I'm afraid
range.
It's very location and specification led.
Okay, but as we've said, obviously we can be very specific when we meet you. Are there any hurdles that farmers could face?
Absolutely. Well, the main hurdle is the planning process itself.
Yeah.
So there's lots of factors that go into the planning process. We've mentioned a few in terms of flood risk, highway safety, accessible location, and viability, shall we say, in terms of IT and data. They are particularly if you're going for an office type use.
First question we get asked now.
Yeah. What's the data speed and the internet and fibre access to fibre, and it is a lot better than it was, and there are a lot of solutions in the name of Starlink and things of that nature. Yeah. But it is certainly a significant consideration.
Okay. Is there anything else in regards to like what hurdles farmers might be faced with other than just the planning aspect?
Location's important. I mean, we talked about location being right, but if you're trying to remove staff perhaps from a more urban environment to a rural environment, I mean, I would suggest there are benefits to the staff in working in a more urban green environment than being in a town centre. But you've got to get staff on board.
Yeah.
And some locations perhaps can be too rural. There needs to be somewhere for the staff to walk at lunchtime perhaps, or a shop in the vicinity. So there are lots of factors. I mean, that also can play in with storage units as well. But for storage units, you haven't necessarily got people sitting there from 9 to 5. But there are factors to think about.
The other thing we haven't really talked about is open storage and yard spaces,
which is a very growing sector at the moment. Yes,
and quite often a farm. There may well be a few farm buildings and a yard, and again the yard is quite an important feature, both for HGV turning, unloading, storage even, and certainly that's worthy of consideration. And unfortunately, that doesn't fall under Class R, and that would be a full planning consent because Class R is only for conversion of the building itself.
Okay.
Yeah, it's come about in the last 5 years, I would say, where open storage, and I've been doing this an awfully long time, but open storage was letting at, I'm going back to old money here, 50p a square foot or thereabouts, and it seemed to be the case for time immemorial, but we're now achieving £1.50 if you have a storage area that is in a rural location but quite close to perhaps a major intersection. I'm aware of rates of over £2 being achieved.
Wow. Okay. So that's obviously a growing area that farmers should look at. It sounds like there's a lot to consider, but it's very bespoke to the individual. Is there anything else to add before we conclude?
I think, as a general commentary, I would say that the barns in rural areas, I'm seeing that mainly being used for smaller workshops, storage type uses. We've done some offices, but they are fewer and further apart now. There doesn't seem to be quite the same demand for office space.
I think the office demand, you're right, David, it's not as it was, whether it's COVID, hybrid working or whatever, but it's not. But I'm seeing a genuine shift from office to retail, quasi-retail uses in offices or former offices, medical, hairdressing and the like. And I think that's going to grow as we move forward.
And I think some of the storage type uses for smaller units is almost a online sales driver, where they need storage space, because every man and dog is set up as an online retailer and needs a little bit of storage. Yes, there's the big boys, the Amazon likes that do all the packaging for you, but there are quite a few people that are selling on eBay or some of the other online platforms that need smaller storage spaces that are dry, conditioned, and don't really need a huge amount of space and might fit onto a farm site quite well.
Yeah, they perhaps work from home, but they need somewhere to store the goods that they import from the Far East. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you ever so much, David, for your time today. Thank you for listening. One thing just to highlight is that obviously Robinson Hall have a broad range of services. So the beauty of using us is that we can see your project from start to right through to completion. And obviously we've got a commercial lettings and sales department as well to be able to sell or let the unit afterwards. Thank you for your time. I've launched a range of podcasts over the years. There's various subjects. There's a couple on planning, one on permitted development rights. We have also had a commercial market update recently, so please listen to the others and hopefully you'll tune in again next time. Many thanks. Goodbye. Our podcasts are for informational purposes only and are based on the information available at the date of the recording. Listeners are responsible for how they interpret and use the information, and Robinson Hall LLP will not be responsible for any losses, damages or liabilities that may arise from a listener relying on the information given. Listeners should take advice from an appropriate professional which is tailored to their specific needs.